Okay, continuing on with Chapter 11, the protists, Kingdom Protista. These are the protist producers, also known as algae. Algae are eukaryotic organisms that convert the sun's energy into food through photosynthesis, but that do not have roots, stems, or leaves. Okay, so what that means is, as we already said at the beginning, that protists do not have complex tissues, which means they also don't have organs, and root stems and leaves are considered to be organs. So no complex tissues, therefore algae have to belong to Kingdom Protista and not to the Kingdom Plantae. There are several groups of protist producers, but we're just going to focus on 6 major ones for this, and they are as follows. Red algae, also known as Rhodophyta. You will not need to know the scientific name. I'm okay with just red algae. And these consist of most of the world's seaweed, so they prefer salt water. They are usually less than a meter in length. They have the green chlorophyll pigment for photosynthesis, but they also have a red pigment for photosynthesis that actually allows them to absorb light at deeper depths. If you think about light as being made up of different wavelengths of light, there are certain wavelengths that chlorophyll absorbs, but at a certain point in the water column, as you're going deeper in water, that wavelength of light can't go anymore. And the red pigment actually absorbs a wavelength of light that can penetrate water farther than the wavelengths of light associated with chlorophyll. So this means that out of all the deep algae of the world, they're almost all red, because the red pigment is the thing that can allow for them to do photosynthesis at that depth. Quick little look at this. Won't be much, just I think this is actually an aquarium. But you can at least see some examples of different macro algae, red algae in here. They're kind of pretty. I kind of like them. There's also some green algae back here. Anyway, good enough. Next is green algae. Green algae, known as Chlorophyta. This is your most diverse group of algae. They're found in the most places in the world. They have the main pigment is that chlorophyll green pigment. You find them in the ocean, in saltwater. You find them in freshwater. You find them growing on trees. You find them growing on soil, sometimes even growing on organisms and even inside of other organisms. And these guys can get pretty large, 8 meters, but they are still not the largest of all of the algae. That comes next. I'm going to show you a quick video of this area of China. Oh no, I think it might be Japan. Let me see. It's funny. No, it's China. There's a particular beach in China that has been having kind of a green algae problem. The algae itself is not toxic, and in fact it's edible and many people do eat it. But as you can see, it's sort of taken over this beach. People still swim in it. Looks a little strange. And people have, look at that. That's just crazy. When they were having the Olympics in China, this was a place where I think they were either doing rowing or some water sport. They had to come through and clear this place of so much algae just so they could do the sporting event. Crazy, huh? Don't know why it's so prolific. It might have to do with runoff from land as far as, fertilizers or something that's making the algae just bloom so big. But anyway, moving along. Brown algae is the next group. Phaeophyta or Chromista, depends on who you talk to. This includes the largest algae and also the largest protist in the kingdom. This particular algae prefers colder climates. So seaweed, and they're almost all saltwater. So there's seaweed that prefer the cooler climates, like California, along the coast, Pacific. They have chlorophyll, like all the others, but they also have a yellow-brown pigment that can vary their coloration from either a yellowy color to more of a dark brown color. Just depends on the species. And it includes the largest species, like the one you see here, which is kelp. that can grow up to 60 meters in length. So very large, very large. And I was just going to show a tiny piece of this Monterey Bay Aquarium video of kelp forest. They are very much like the rainforest. People call them the rainforests of the sea. So there's tons of species, and these plants are just so big, even though they're not really plants, they're algae. So crazy, huh? All right. Okay, this brings us to diatoms. Now we've done these last three groups that we've done are all multicellular algae. The next few that we're doing are pretty much single-celled algae. Diatoms are single-celled organisms that are encased in a symmetrical silica shell, two-part shell. And silica is the same stuff we make glass out of, so it's very much like glass, and they're very pretty on how they catch the light, and their symmetry really caught the eyes of early scientists when microscopes first began to be used. Everyone was intrigued by these little things because they were so almost jewel-like underneath the microscope. And so a lot of people took up, and you could find them anywhere. You could find them in salt and fresh water. So there's a lot of people in Victorian times that took up the hobby of creating art pieces out of diatoms, and they would collect samples, and using this funny like microscope kind of enlarged thing with little pins, they would create artworks. So each one of these is a single-celled organism, a diatom. And it's impressive kind of the patience that was necessary for this. I mean, these, you know, basic, you know, you could probably do those without too much effort, but it's still a lot of work. But wait till you see some of these others. Look at that. Can you imagine? I mean, that's all little single-cell things that have been arranged to create this image. Or how about those down here? Hold on, there's more. Look at that. And look, a chicken and a rooster. Crazy. Beautiful stuff. Anyway, you can still sort of find these around. You can get prints made of them and stuff, but not many people I know still do this sort of hobby, because it does take a lot of patience and a lot of time. All right, those are your diatoms. The other thing that's important about diatoms is they make up most of the world's phytoplankton. Plankton, by definition, is anything that cannot swim against the current, so they basically have to go wherever the water goes. So it's anything that's in the water column that's at the mercy of the currents, basically. Phyto, that prefix phyto, refers to plankton that can do photosynthesis. So most of the world's phytoplankton is diatoms. Phytoplankton is the source of most of the world's photosynthesis. So by that definition, diatoms are the largest contributor to basically all photosynthetic products. So like oxygen, glucose, they contribute a great deal to it. So even though they're really, really tiny and single-celled, they are very, very important. Next group, Dinoflagellates, also known as Pyrophyta. Some people may recognize that prefix pyro. It means fire, and there's a reason for that. Kind of gives you a hint over here. These are single-celled organisms that have two flagella, and they have little shells also, like the diatoms, but they're not exactly the same. They can look a little like weird, funky, spaceship-y things over here, but they use the flagella to move. They are found mostly in saltwater, and they're primary causes of red tide. Excuse me. So I don't know if any of you have been on a coast for any length of time, but red tide periodically occurs in coastal regions where you get maybe after a storm when there's been a lot of runoff from the land and suddenly there's a lot of nutrients in the water, and you get these huge algae blooms. Dinoflagellates will then just like reproduce really fast, and in that process they have some coloration to them. They turn the water reddish. Not always, and not always this dramatically red, but the problem with dinoflagellates is they naturally produce a toxin, several species of them, and this toxin is a neurotoxin, so it affects like this, you know, your brain and your spinal cord, and so it's kind of a serious toxin. And if you're not paying attention to when these red tides happen and you happen to eat a contaminated fish or eat some shellfish, like oysters or something, that have taken this toxin into their tissues from their own feeding, then you can die. I mean, it's serious. So pay attention if you're at the coast and they have warnings about red tides, because they'll say, oh, we have a red tide in effect, please, no fishing, no eating of shellfish and they'll give a date, or they'll say until further notice. And then you wait, and then everything kind of returns to normal once it balances out. Because in low levels, because they're always found around, the dinoflagellates are always around, but at low levels they don't really do any harm. It's just when they have these huge algal blooms, like I said, that are usually a result of either a storm that's washed a bunch of nutrients offshore, or if you're at a place where there's a sewage outflow and those nutrients are being utilized, or it might be from fertilizer runoff in rivers. So any of those contribute to these blooms, and that's the fertilizer issue is one reason why we see these algal blooms more often than we used to, because of high agricultural runoff. All right, these are primarily producers, but there are a few that are sort of odd, but we don't need to know those. Now, on a positive note, dinoflagellates are also known for bioluminescence. If you've ever been at a beach where you see, you can like run your hand through the water and everything lights up, those are primarily caused by dinoflagellates that bioluminesce. And what you see in this picture is a person lying down doing basically angels in the water and creating this light, which is kind of cool. You can also put them in a bottle and shake them up and they'll light up. It's fun. Okay, moving on. Euglenoids, the last group of algae, also single-celled. But these are the fun ones that can both be autotrophic and heterotrophic, which means they prefer to be autotrophic, so that means they're going to make their own food. So as long as there's sunlight, they're doing photosynthesis and they're happy. They even have a little, you can barely see it in this one here and over here, a little red eye spot. It's just a pigment that kind of alerts them as to where the light is, and they can swim towards it. So if they can find the light, they want to do photosynthesis. Now, if the light's sort of not that good, they can just start eating stuff, and they're perfectly fine. So it's a pretty cool combination. They got the best of both worlds. Most of these guys are freshwater, just so you know. And they do have a single flagella that you can see in some of these pictures that they use to swim with. Usually they swim in the direction of where the flagella is. So like this guy would swim in this direction. You will see some examples of this in our Protist lab. All right, this brings us to the end of the Protist producers. I'm going to go ahead and take another break here, and then I will create another video for the heterotrophs. All right.